Hello everyone, I'm Simon Barnes. I'm a partner in the competition team at Shoesmiths. Welcome to the fourth podcast in our series of 8 podcasts on compliance and risk management. We've been exploring various aspects of managing compliance risks, and today we're going to focus very much on embedding compliance within organisations. We're going to look at, for example, what does embedding compliance mean and how can it best be achieved? Now, to help me answer these questions, I'm joined today by my colleague, Sharif Malik, who's a partner in our data privacy team. Hi, Sharif.
Hi, nice to be here.
Various issues we need to think about. And I think in a podcast which is entitled Embedding Compliance, the very obvious place to start, I think, is what exactly do we mean by embedding compliance? That term, embedding compliance, to you from your experience, what does it mean?
I think compliance generally has 2 main elements to it. And there's the document, the foundational compliance, and then the documentary compliance that supports that. And then there's the conduct and behaviours and practices that give effect and breathe life into that. I think when we would refer to embedding compliance, we mean something more than a tick box exercise. We mean something integrated, something deep into systems, so that compliance is almost culturally part of a business or an organisation. So it's something more than just dealing with it on the face of it, but rather really placing it at the heart of a business so that it operates safely and soundly.
You and I, over the years, have worked with lots of businesses on compliance. You as a data privacy lawyer, me as a competition lawyer. We have colleagues elsewhere in the firm advising on other areas of compliance, other areas of regulatory compliance, financial services compliance, and so on. The question that we are all consistently working with our clients on is, in practical terms, what is the best way to embed compliance? Any thoughts?
Well, there's no single way to approach it, and it tends to be something that needs to reflect the needs and the risk appetite of the businesses. But fundamentally, it does require preparation, irrespective of how you're approaching it. Compliance rarely works well as an afterthought or a bolt-on. And so there needs to be an open, frank discussion around the regulations and rules that a business is subject to, and then understanding how that's going to be reflected in business processes, in the culture of the business, and ultimately in making sure that the risks are managed effectively. So no one single approach, but certainly something that needs preparation and discussion in order to make sure it's adequately reflective of how the business wants to operate.
Yeah. And I think we probably both accept, in some ways it's easier said than done, but nevertheless it is a challenge that businesses need to rise to. I mean, in my experience, I think the starting point for a business, of course, is to work out what exactly is it we need to comply with, because the answer to that will be slightly different for different businesses. But once those areas of compliance need have been identified, as you say, it's partly a question of having systems in place, which I think in your data privacy world is particularly important. It will also be the case in certain other areas like financial services, for example. In my world as a competition and broader regulatory sphere, a lot of compliance actually comes down to the individual. It's about individuals being out there and doing stuff at day-to-day business, as a competition law, and bumping into competitors in an event. It's about people knowing what they can and can't do in those circumstances. And I think the starting point is to ensure that those individuals have the appropriate level of awareness. They don't need to be legal experts, but they do need to have the right level of information, the right awareness of the right areas of compliance. And I think that leads on to the question, which is, well, how best can businesses embed that knowledge, that awareness in individuals? I mean, in the data privacy world, what do you think are the best ways to impart that knowledge on individuals so they're at least aware of the basics they need to know?
So data protection and privacy is an area where it really is a team game in order to make sure you get to the right result. The reality is that unlike some other areas of compliance where it affects a certain function specifically, data protection is something that affects everyone in the business, because personal data is usually the lifeblood of some part, if not all, of a business.
Yeah.
So understanding the allocation of those responsibilities is important. It also means, for a really busy legal team, understanding that you can't shoulder the burden of all the assessments and all the safeguards that you need to implement to make sure that you get this right. So I think the first acknowledgement is understanding that lots of different stakeholders, all members of staff, and indeed to a degree, depending on the industry, some customers too, have a part to play in making sure that that personal data is and the rules around it are respected.
Yeah. One of the areas that, as lawyers, we're often guiding our clients on is how best to impart and ultimately train their staff and potentially other stakeholders, as you say, on what the key compliance messages are. There's a range of ways in which businesses can do that. There's face-to-face training. There's e-learning, which actually we have several clients providing e-learning to thousands of individuals, not just across the country, but internationally, and actually potentially in a number of different languages as well. And I think e-learning can be a very effective way of efficiently delivering awareness to individuals, again, in a very, very efficient way. That said, sometimes getting people in a room or potentially virtually on Teams can also be a way of, having a live session can be a way of imparting that knowledge. And it does seem to me, and I'm feeding you a line here because I think we probably, no doubt we both agree on this, that the key to embedding those compliance messages is that people need to understand is the right information, but the right information is the commercially relevant information. It's not a matter of knowing the law. It's actually about knowing what does the law mean in practical terms so people can apply it. I guess you see that probably quite a lot, don't you, in terms of taking, as a data privacy lawyer, some really quite technical areas of law, that very few of us pretend to understand if we're not the experts, but translating that into messages that individuals, including many people in businesses who are not lawyers, can understand and apply.
And that's absolutely right. A word you hear a lot, both in data protection, privacy, and beyond, is the word operationalization. And that, of course, means taking what often is a law that's practical requirements don't leap off the page. That's particularly the case with, say, a piece of legislation like the GDPR and other laws around the world, which are very similar, where they are principles-based. So you're expected to understand the broad, high-level principle and then breathe life into it in the context of your own organization. And so that's not a case of just reducing the text of a legislation to a set of instructional parts and cascading that through the business. There's a really important layer where you decide, what does that look like for our business? What are the demands of that in the context of our sector? What are the demands of that in the context of our activity, in the context of our jurisdiction, in the context of our footprint? So all of that is something that needs careful untangling to make sure that it's translating the legislation in a way that it was intended, but also one that works, again, for the business.
Yeah. I just want to get back to a word that you used a few minutes ago, which is culture. To the extent that people write textbooks or articles or guidance on embedding compliance, the word culture often comes up. I think it might be helpful just to say a few words about, A, why is culture important? And B, what does it mean when people say we need to have a compliance culture within the business? Because I agree entirely with you. It's absolutely crucial.
I think it goes beyond the policies and procedures that are the guardrails there. That's the starting point to help aid understanding, and training too, again, helps with that. But I think it's, when you refer to culture, you're referring to those elements, to working practices, to attitudes that begin to take on board intrinsically through those safeguards and through all that preparatory work, an element where it comes naturally to the person who's acting and behaving. So we often talk about a privacy first culture, where your first concern or one of your initial priority concerns about anything, whatever you are doing, whether it's something straightforward, such as leaving work for the evening, or it is thinking about a project and how you're going to deliver it for customers, you are intuitively thinking about privacy issues right at the start. So it's something that goes, it's something that is intangible in many respects. It is fed through all the great preparatory work and the training and the learning, all those other steps. But it's the point at which colleagues are bringing that knowledge and that informed approach naturally to the work they do. What does it look like in the world of competition and antitrust?
Yeah, well, very similar. I was going to say that we've both seen businesses, I know, who've done this well, and some businesses have done it not so well. And I think I'll come to those in a minute as to what does good look like, what does perhaps not so good look like. But I agree with everything you say. A key bit, particularly in areas like competition or anti-bribery and other areas which are principally, to a large extent, down to the individuals and relying on individuals to have the right awareness, imparting that knowledge and awareness is one thing, but supporting it with the right culture that gives people, to be frank, leads people to think, yes, this is really important. This is not just box ticking. We're being told these are the rules and we need to follow them because that's what the business expects. I think having senior management support to reinforce that, absolutely key. When I'm delivering training to a client, if it is face-to-face in a room, if you have a member of senior management in the room, it makes so much difference to the engagement you get. People elsewhere in the business can see senior manager is there, they get this, they are supporting this. And also sometimes when you're delivering training, I'm sure you've had the same, most of the messages as a compliance lawyer, most of the messages actually are, there are ways of doing what you want to do commercially, but there may be better ways and less good ways. But most things are achievable one way or another. It's just sometimes a question of having a few checks and balances or position them slightly differently. Sometimes, though, as compliance lawyers, occasionally we do have to say, no, you can't do that. And I think the first thing I would say is a compliance lawyer's role is not to say no. That's not what we're here for. I think it's very easy and lazy in some respects for people to think, oh, compliance is all about saying, no, you can't do this, you can't do that.
Absolutely.
But I think good compliance lawyers we pride ourselves in finding ways that things can be done without having to say no, because none of us want to say no to a business, because ultimately we are not here to get in the way. We're here to find safe ways of doing things. But occasionally the answer is no, and having a senior member of management to back you up as the advisor and say to their business teams, as their leader, look guys, this is important, we need to comply, and if the answer is no, the answer is no. I think you need to have that senior management in the room to help reinforce that message. Beyond that, compliance awareness and training is yes, it's about imparting knowledge, but it's not just a one-off hit, is it? It's about having an ongoing culture of people thinking, as you say, being embedded on sort of the longer term.
But we get a bit of a bad press because often the answer is yes, but rather than no. Certainly a lot of the fear-mongering around the GDPR, even yesterday speaking with colleagues, and they were saying, what can't you do under the law? Well, the answer is very, very little that you can't do.
Yeah.
There are things that you have to do in order to achieve what you want, and often they may be conflictual with what you want to do. But generally speaking, with compliance, it is something is usually a positive answer, but with a caveat, potentially a bit more tricky in your field. And finally, what you're saying is absolutely it needs a culture of respect for the rules, knowing that generally speaking, someone is saying that something is going to put the business or organization at risk, then it really needs to be respected. It is difficult for colleagues to have to say that they've done something wrong as part of any good culture of compliance, where you put your hands up and say, look, I need to bring something to attention, because failing to do so is actually going to escalate the risks, going to amplify it by not bringing it to someone's attention. That is difficult, but a culture of safety around being able to whistleblow or being able to admit that things have not gone on quite right is definitely a positive step towards a safer business.
Yeah. Sure, we've got a few minutes left, I think. Let's wrap up with a few top tips, let's call it. You and I will both have seen the good, businesses that do it well, the bad, sometimes where businesses could have done things perhaps a little bit better. Let's perhaps start with the bad, so we finish with the good. Pitfalls. What, in your experience, are the biggest pitfalls that businesses that are setting out with the best of intentions of wanting to embed compliance within their businesses, what are the pitfalls that the mistakes people sometimes can make?
I think the first is over-reliance on documentary compliance. I've lost count of the number of times I see policies that are just not operationalized, they're not trained against, they seemingly are part of a tick box exercise. To give one really good example is data retention.
Mm-hmm.
Often there can be a perception that those types of documents or issues are a function of the legal team, that the legal team can help conduct and deliver full compliance. But as I said earlier, it's a team game. And if you think about something like data retention, then you need the tooling as a member of staff, as a business, to be able to give effect to what policies say. So the first area where businesses fall down is really around over-reliance on documentary compliance and not understanding that it's the operationalization piece that actually keeps you safe and honest. I think the other is making sure, I mean, it's a linked issue, which is making sure that in order to have that culture, you need to keep awareness around things alive. One business, a retailer, created a cartoon character to apply to all documents where personal data was involved, and with a bit of tongue-in-cheek humour, although not to everyone's tastes, at least was visible, at least reminded everybody that there was a compliance issue that touched on certain things, and that was brought to life through something which was, I guess, novel, but at the end of the day was something that people would speak about at the water cooler. What about yourself?
Yeah. In terms of pitfalls, I think that the biggest pitfall, dare I say it, is sometimes businesses might say, this year we're going to focus on anti-bribery compliance or competition compliance. They will do all the right things in terms of setting out to raise awareness. They will get staff to come along to a training session. The training session will go very, very well. That might be January in the year. That doesn't address the issue forevermore. Compliance is not a one-off. Compliance to work effectively, I think, needs to be ongoing. And I'd be interested, perhaps you and me, to talk another time about the cartoon character, because compliance needs to engage the individuals. Otherwise, there's a risk, unfortunately, that people go to a training session, may or may not pay attention, but even if they do pay attention, if they never hear about that issue again or don't hear about it for another year or 2 years, it goes out of people's minds, because we're all fallible and we have to be realistic.
Yeah.
I do think the little and often works well, so it may be an initial awareness raising, but then regular, just small, subtle reminders so that people keep it front of mind. Other pitfalls, I haven't seen this too often, but I have seen it occasionally, and it comes back to the culture piece. Very occasionally, businesses do treat compliance as just a tick box exercise. It's similar to my first point: is we've had the training session, that's it. Where it gets worse than that is when management teams and very occasionally legal teams don't then engage on an ongoing basis. And again, it comes back to the culture. It's all very well having awareness within the business teams, but people need to live and breathe compliance, which means you've got to have the feedback loop, and you've got to have the ability for people to ask the questions and seek guidance. And that relies again on management and or legal team, if there is one, being receptive and being willing to deal with those issues commercially. Again, coming back to the point, compliance should not be there to say no unless absolutely necessary. So those are the pitfalls. Very finally, what about compliance when it works? What does good look like?
I think, as I said that at the outset, good can come in various forms. I think those that are get an A star on their scorecard really take compliance and begin to use it in a manner that goes beyond keeping the business safe, actually begins to yield commercial benefits. So those that don't see compliance as a zero-sum game, that actually it's not necessarily that their commercial interest will be damaged or diminished through having to comply. So from, again, in my field, that would be where, for example, mapping where your data is. Businesses that did a really good job of that and went beyond what the law required. Yeah. Now, when they are thinking about where they can leverage training data for their AI models, realize that they have wonderful factual information around business and management information as to how they can now feed their commercially driven initiatives in a better way. So I think good preparation and design, you can actually begin to ask, okay, so we have to do this to comply with the law, but is there a positive externality to this from a business perspective, from a financial perspective? Can we leverage this in a way that actually is useful for us in other ways? Yeah. And I think that's really, for me, is when you are, those are the businesses that create committees between their security, privacy and commercial functions in order to say, there's a cost to the business of this. How can we get the best bang for our buck in other areas?
Yeah. Sharif, super. Thank you very much for your insight. It's been great to have this conversation. For our listeners, if you'd like to find out more, please do visit the Shoesmiths website, where there's more information about our compliance risk and management services. You can also listen to the other podcasts that we're producing on this topic. As I said, there are 8 in total, so please do have a listen to those. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll be back soon for episode 5 of this series, which is about compliance advisory. Thank you very much for listening.